I'm Haley. Welcome to the whole podcast. Thanks for tuning in, and I hope you enjoy the show. Hi, everyone. My name is Haley Korf, and I am your vision impaired host today. We are very excited to be in a unique interview. And so I am going to be working with Chriz, and we are going to be talking about the Museum of Deaf History, Arts, and Culture. And so if I understand correctly, Chriz, you are the executive director. Is that correct?
Correct.
Correct. Okay, so before we jump into any of our questions, I would kind of want to go over some of the proper protocols for working with somebody who's working with a interpreter. Would that be okay with you, just so our public can know what's going on and how to work better maybe with somebody who has a hearing difficulty?
Sure. So many deaf people have various approaches to how they choose to communicate. Deaf people that use sign language like to use interpreters, and for this unique situation, we have two interpreters present so that communication just flows more fluently for our interview. We have one interpreter that's going to be voicing, who is voicing for me currently, and then we have another interpreter that will be signing your questions and what you say, Haley. And that is not typical in most interpreting situations. I mean, sometimes we just have one interpreter, but today we have two. But I do look forward to this interview with you.
Yes, I'm so excited. And a couple of other things that I've learned, and correct me if I'm wrong, is when you're working with somebody who is hard of hearing or deaf and you're working with an interpreter, your eye contact needs to remain with your individual, not the interpreters. Is that correct?
It is correct. So, as we're talking, we have an interpreter off to the side, but yes, we will maintain eye contact with each other and not with the interpreter.
Yes. And the reason for that, if I'm correct again, I might be wrong, is that you're the person. You're the person that I'm talking to. And so while I might have to clarify information with an interpreter, my conversation is with you. And so if you and I were just talking without interpreters, I would still just be talking to you as a person. And so that's a sign of respect and a way to communicate properly with an individual who's hard of hearing or deaf. So I just think it's important because not everybody understands that. I've explained that in my years of working in the blind community even. So
Yes. It's very important to ask the person. Again, every person is different in how they prefer to communicate. So definitely ask what their communication preferences are just to make it more effective. I mean, some may be fine with just using their hearing aids. Some rely on an interpreter. Some prefer written communication. So everybody has a different approach, and it's just important to ask them what they choose to communicate.
absolutely. I say the same thing for when you're trying to work with somebody who is blind or vision impaired. So that's good to know that it just goes across the board there. So very cool. Okay, well, I just wanted to get some of that information out there so that we can help educate our community. So thank you. I appreciate that. And if there is something that I am doing wrong or inappropriate for communicating with you today, please let me know because I won't be able to make any changes if I don't know. So it won't hurt my feelings, I promise. Maybe just a little bit, but it's a learning experience.
Oh, no worries. I think we'll be just fine.
Cool. Okay. Well, if it's okay with you, I'd like to jump into a little bit more about you and then jump into these questions that we have. We have some really good questions that I wanted to hit on, but I really wanted to get to know you a little bit more and what brought you into working at the museum.
Where do I begin? So I was born deaf to hearing parents. And 95% of deaf individuals are born to hearing parents. And for many parents, they have no idea what to do with the deaf child that they have. And so my parents decided to use sign language with me from the beginning. Many parents oftentimes try communicating without sign language and then later on realize it is better and important to use sign language with their child. I know my mother said by the time I was 2, she noticed I was only able to speak in 2 or 3 word sentences compared with my peers. They were able to, speak in long, full sentences. And so my mother realized we've got to use sign language with her. I grew up in Seattle, Washington. Went to school there and then moved to California. Went to school where there was a large group of deaf students there. And, I call that time in college where I found my deaf identity and became happier as a person, happier with who I was. And then, I spent a long time in California, and I told my parents that I would be moving back at some point. And then I met someone, and that person was from Kansas. So told my parents, I'm so sorry, I'm moving to Kansas. And they were like, what? So that is just quickly my journey of how I got to Kansas. And then I found out about the Deaf Museum. I had never heard about that museum before. At the time, it was called the Deaf Cultural Center. And, I got involved as a board member, and the rest is history.
Wow. Okay, that is amazing. So let me see if I understand this correctly. Did you go to a school for individuals who are deaf or hard of hearing when you were younger, or were you incorporated into the main public schools? What does that look like for you?
So I did attend a public school. There was a small group of deaf students that I was mainstreamed with, and there were 3 high schools in the Seattle area, and one was a bigger group of maybe 20. Another one had maybe 15, and then the school I attended, there was about 10 of us that were deaf that attended in different grade levels, and we all stayed together and played with each other and had some interactions with deaf individuals, but I did not have the experience of attending a deaf school. And that's why it wasn't until I attended college, California State University of Northridge, CSUN, that was about 240 deaf individuals there, so a larger mass of deaf students, and started to really understand who I was as a person.
Yeah, no, I recognize that feeling because when I was dealing with my visual impairment, it came on suddenly. And mom and dad and I did not know where to go, who to talk to. And then when I started getting connected to other people who have vision impairments or blindness, you felt at peace knowing that there were other people and that, you could see other people being successful. But you also didn't have to explain all the quirks that come with your disability. You know what I mean? To put it plainly, I don't know how to say that properly, but I don't always have to explain. I'm not gonna make eye contact at you, but I'm still listening. And it was nice to be able to exist in that way.
Right. And knowing that you're not alone, that you're not just singled out in society. You're not just one person. You have others like you. And that is just so important.
Yes. And the knowledge that comes with working with other individuals, that they were able to provide to mom and I, because my dad was always flying. He used to be a pilot. So mom and I went to all the meetings and all the knowledge that came from different people, age ranges. It was a lot, but it was helpful at the time because we didn't know what we were doing. How do you get an ID? What do you do for that? All the things. So, because they don't let me drive, I guess. So, yeah.
Yeah, I don't know if I'm stating this correctly, but I feel like what's wrong with society is we are set up to where parents and individuals have to rely on the medical field and doctors on how to receive services and how to talk about that individual. That's the parents' first influence is from the medical field. If you just right away associate with a deaf adult or any adult who is like the child, then you have different expectations that are set right away, and just a different feeling of wholeness in the person and in their parents too. I think that's important, is finding individuals who are like the child, and we need more adults within the system. I think that's a nice way of stating that.
Yeah. And I agree, because when I was working with the state for like 6.5 years or however long, I don't even want to admit, there were a lot of times where we would go out and try to talk to eye doctors, and share what our organization did. And a lot of doctors didn't know that we existed. And so how would you tell somebody who just recently went vision impaired or blind about these resources and that there is hope? And so I do believe that there needs to be more peer counseling, maybe, when a situation like that arises.
Exactly. Yes.
Yeah. Maybe we should start a business.
Yes. Yes.
But yeah, that's a good point. Okay. Let me look at our next question, if you don't mind. It's a very lengthy one, so I want to make sure I'm getting it all down correctly so I can ask it. Oh yeah. Okay. How do you balance preserving deaf history while making it accessible and engaging for today's audience?
So when I got involved with the Deaf Museum, we changed the name to Museum of Deaf History, Arts, and Culture, just to help us become more aligned with the mission of advancing and preserving information about deaf people. And what that does is not only focus on the history, but also the preservation of the culture and the lived experiences of deaf individuals. We were talking about frustrations with the system and how they approach deaf people. So part of the work we do is to try to educate the medical field on what it's like from a deaf person's lived experience, so that they can better understand and also be more engaged with the understanding of how to work with deaf adults and working with families. So that's the work that we're doing at the museum. And what's interesting for us is we understand that we have two audiences. And that's something that many people don't realize. And it shifts, how we interact with both audiences. The first audience, of course, is deaf individuals themselves. They're curious about their own history, their own culture, and, they want to celebrate that, or they want to become more informed and appreciate that. And so we have that audience that we cater to, but then we also have a second audience who are hearing people, as we call it. And, the hearing people really have no idea about lives of deaf people. So we have to change how we engage depending on the audience that we have at the time. So the work we do is to provide programs, services, and in thinking about the museum in the eyes and ears of both audiences that we serve.
that is a tough job because you have to make sure you're working and helping both audiences on different levels. And so I could see that being very difficult almost every day. Um, just coordinating things even in the blind community is difficult but needed every day. So that is a tough job. So let me see if I understand this correctly. So you were on the board for the museum and then transitioned over to executive director?
Correct.
Yeah.
Hmm.
How long were you on the board for?
Oh, let's see. Almost 7 years. And I should mention that that is not a typical path for a nonprofit or museum. You typically don't want to do that. But, we were in a unique time, just getting out of COVID, and the museum didn't have a lot of money. So, a strategy that we as a board decided to adopt that path with the hopes that the museum could become self-sustained and, moving forward with new young deaf people, in that role in the future. So, it was just a unique path. But I was grateful for the opportunity because, as a board member, we were able to make significant changes with how we were able to meet our mission. And, we had the board that we had a good relationship with, but then I moved to executive director to support the mission while I was also doing the work to get things implemented.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. That is quite a path though, and very difficult during COVID. I can't imagine what you guys were going through with all of that in the museum. But we're grateful that the museum existed or exists because some of us went and took a tour of the museum, and honestly, I had no idea about 90% of the information that was there. And so my colleagues and I were just going through it at our own pace and understanding and asking Mickey, our colleague, all the questions because she's one of our deaf advocates. So we were just like, what is this? And what does this mean? And how does this work? And so it was very eye-opening. Learned a lot that day. Um, the artwork was also very interesting. Clark, our other deaf advocate, was explaining some of the artwork as well. So you guys have a rich history all in one area and very much appreciated. Okay.
We do. Yeah, we do. We didn't have an art gallery when I started as a board member. What we had in the museum was a design of a bedroom, and that bedroom depicted ways that deaf people wake up with not an alarm, but some type of vibration alarm that wakes them up. And then, we had the TV with the closed captioning in the room, and maybe how a deaf mother would wake up to the baby crying or a dog barking. So it had that information. And a lot of us deaf individuals on the board did not like the idea of how it gave hearing individuals one specific view in how deaf people are helped and how they cope. We just didn't like that view, and we felt like we're more than that. We experience more than that. So we shifted the focus and got rid of the bedroom and started the art gallery, which was great timing because there was a very well-known deaf artist that passed away in 2012, and he was from Kansas, and his impact on deaf art around the world was huge. So we decided to honor him, and his name was Chuck Baird. So we have an art gallery now named after him, and he was very critical for depicting how deaf people saw themselves through artwork. And there are other deaf artists that, there are other artists who paint landscapes and animals and birds and do woodworking. But there was another group of artists that did artwork that talked about their deaf experience, whether it was positive and a celebration of what deaf values are, or also had some artwork that showed a reflection of their negative lived experience, their frustrations that they faced. So, they used artwork to try to resist and liberate themselves from those negative experiences they may have had. And I think that was more of a valuable tool for us as a museum to better represent our lived experiences to visitors so that they could understand our experience. And it became very important for both audiences that came into the museums, and they seemed very understanding. Hearing people, would come into the museum and were like, oh, okay. And it really made them think, and hopefully they left with more thought about what we go through.
Oh, yes, that has been accomplished with that part of the museum. Yes. Wow, what a story. There were some different art pieces that really just caught your eye, and so we asked for all the background information when we were in that part, and we were just like, tell us everything about this, because I know what I interpret this as, but I want to know the background of it. So yeah, I think you've accomplished that goal. Okay, let me look at our next questions here. I'm gonna break eye contact. Okay. Oh, yeah, okay. You've dedicated over 20 years to the deaf community services, working through advocacy, education, counseling, and consulting. Which experience, or have all of them, shaped your leadership style? Because walking into leadership is not easy. And so what does that look like for you?
You're right. All of those experiences, really, they all have had an impact on me, and I'm always learning something from an experience. And a lot of the experiences have shaped how I view things. I think, whether it's counseling or an advocacy role, all of that has helped me to better understand my work. I think it's just a perfect way for me to be involved with the museum because all of those experiences, I'm often thinking about how all of that experience informs my comments and whether I'm framing them correctly. I don't want to frame my comments in a way that I may hurt deaf children or be harmful, because my passion is with deaf children. So I always am thinking how I can frame what I'm saying and doing. That way I have a better impact on deaf children who are now growing up. And so, yeah, I would say all of that has informed my work. And, I still think about some situations where I've been, I was doing advocacy work in Sacramento, California. And there was one situation that still is with me today. There was a hearing mother that had a deaf boy. And I think he may have been 7 or 8 at the time. And I was working with them. The mom was really struggling and had her son implanted with a cochlear implant. She was struggling with making that decision. And I was really trying to advocate for the family, but I also was thinking more of the boy. And, the mom said that the child had asked mom, if I have a cochlear implant now, does that mean you didn't love me before I had the cochlear implant? And I just thought, I understood him because I've been there. When I was a kid, I totally understood where he was coming from. And so trying to work with the mother, and, it was so long ago, I don't remember specifically, but just trying to explain to the schools, I knew that the boy needed sign language support. The mother wasn't ready for that, and she was upset about how I advocated in that situation for him. And I lost the mother's trust in that situation. So I'm often trying to think, even though I understand where the deaf kid's coming from, I mean, the mother is going to be in his life for the rest of his life. So trying to just keep the parents engaged and keep their trust until they get it. So that's why art to me is so important, because maybe if the mother had seen some artwork from other deaf people's experiences, she may have had an aha moment a lot earlier. And so, yeah, I oftentimes I wonder what's happening with that boy and where he is now. So that sticks with me. And just all of those different experiences I've had and been through, advocating and counseling and consulting, I'm always thinking about how they perceive and interpret something, and at the same time, how my own experience, I know is important information, but they may not be ready for it. So just how to share that and how to meet them where they're at. It's just such an interesting journey that I'm navigating, and still provides me with challenges.
Yeah, no, I want to thank you for sharing that, because that must be a hard situation to always think on and share. I've dealt with similar situations where you're trying to advocate for the child, but the parents aren't necessarily ready to hear what you're saying. We're always like, "Oh, this is what you need in these steps," but the parent isn't there yet. And so you have to be really careful and dance this fine line about communicating for the child, but also making sure everybody is still on the same page. And it's hard, and it breaks my heart, some of the situations that I've had to deal with as well. And I do often think, what could have been an aha moment? And I think you're right. Some of the artwork would have probably been an eye opener as well, because it depicts something that we can't necessarily say as people, and it's hard to communicate some things. And so communicating through art is universal, in my opinion, and it it could have been an eye-opening situation for her. So that's a tough one. That is tough. Mm. Now you got me thinking about all my my past situations. It's all flooding through. Okay, let me look at our next question here, okay? Oh, yeah, we've kind of talked about this one a little bit. The next question is wanting to know what it was like transitioning from being a board member to the executive director for the museum, and what goals do you have for the museum moving forward?
We have many goals, but we've been challenged by things that are happening at the political level and landscape. I'm sure you guys can relate to that. I think, we have two important goals in mind. We're working on developing, so the museum just acquired a program called the Deafhood Institute. And the Deafhood Institute is a very important program that we have acquired the program from a different organization. The different organization is Deafhood Foundation. They have closed down, and so we now have that program under the museum. The Deafhood Institute does work mainly with a deaf audience. And it's where, deaf individuals can reflect on their own experiences and understand their lives. I mean, basically understanding their journey as a deaf person, finding their identity, and sometimes realizing that there's nothing wrong with them. They're fine. It's the way they are. And so that's what we've been doing with classes and workshops with the Deafhood Institute. We also allies. We also have allies in Deafhood. It's probably not a word that we want to use often, but just trying to do anti-autism work where we're trying to deal with systems that think being able to hear is more important or better, and looking at those that can hear as having more authority over us. So we do a lot of anti-autism work with hearing audiences. So with all of that work we've been doing, I really wanted something for the youth. So the last 3 summers, and we recently just wrapped up some work 2 weeks ago, we developed curriculum for Deafhood studies, which encourages youth to reflect on themselves and their identities. And the goal is to provide them an opportunity to better understand themselves while they're younger. That way, they get that out of the way, and they won't struggle as much with it when they're in adulthood and maybe through work and employment. It's very emotional. It's, like I said, 95% of deaf children are born to hearing parents, and research is showing that 70% of those hearing parents do not use sign language in the home. So that has such a psychological and emotional impact on deaf youth. So, we hope to give them the tools on how to better understand themselves and not have so much what I call baggage, that they have to carry throughout their lives. So yeah, really excited about that curriculum that we've developed, and we hope to start using it maybe next year. We need to do a little bit more piloting, but again, hope to use it next year, and we'll start it with deaf schools around the area and then open it to mainstream public schools. And, I think with the way things are happening currently with the attack on IDEA right now and deaf education, this will be a really critical tool to help students understand themselves and understand that it's not, there's nothing wrong with them. It's not them, it's the systems that are in place. So yeah, we're excited about that, and we hope to complete that project and have it ready. The other thing that is exciting about the museum that I forgot to mention is the Deaf Museum is the only one in the United States that is independently run and self-funded. There are many small deaf schools. There are many deaf schools that have their own museums about their schools, their students. Gallaudet University in Washington, D.C. does have their own museum as well, but we are independent of any deaf school. So it's just such a unique opportunity for us to showcase what we are wanting to help people understand and what it means to be deaf. So the, having the museum is wonderful, but a lot of the information within the museum is outdated and also based on a book that was written in the late 1970s by Jack Gans, really well-known deaf historian during that time. And most of the exhibits in the museum are based on that information, and it's not very diverse either. So we know that we need to just make some updated changes and have more fresh information and also have it be more diverse. So we are working to get a grant. That way we can start the process of just changing out some outdated exhibits, but the impacts that are happening at the federal level, it may take longer for us to find funding to continue that project and make changes with the exhibits within the museum. Those two are very important projects that we're focused on as of late.
That is a lot of information, and I had a couple of questions, but now they've escaped me. Would it be okay if we take a quick break and then I can gather my questions and we'll jump right back into all those questions and the questions we have here? Would that be all right with you? All right. All right. Thank you, everyone. We will be back in just a moment.
Living with a disability can feel isolating, but it doesn't have to. At The Whole Person, peer support groups bring people together who truly understand. The Whole Person provides a variety of peer support groups. Brain injury group, share experiences and navigate life after your injury. Mental health group, connect with others managing anxiety, depression, and other mental health challenges. DIY life skills, build confidence and skills for independence, designed for ages 18 to 24. In addition to these, we offer specific groups for spinal cord injuries, blindness and low vision, and deaf and hard of hearing. Whatever your journey, you're not alone. To find your group and attend our next meeting, please visit thewholeperson.org/peer support or call us at 816-561-0304. Peer support at The Whole Person. Real people, real connection.
All right, everyone, we are back from our break, and we are going to jump into some of the follow-up questions that I had, and then we're going to wrap it up with some of the other questions we have listed because they're just too many questions that we have going on. So I wanted to follow up, Chris, a little bit. You said so much that I wanted to address before we took our break, but there was a term that I wanted you to clarify. I wanted to make sure I was understanding it and then the audience was understanding it. We were talking about anti-autism. Am I saying that right? Not autism. Autism? Correct. Okay, and can you clarify that again just to recap what we were talking about, please?
Sure. So autism is a newer word. It actually was just put in the dictionary. And it was a word that was, I think it was by Tom Humphreys. I need to check to see who came up with that word, but we just needed a word to explain the experience that deaf people have. You know, when we feel like we're hitting a wall, we feel like we're being oppressed and facing barriers, being oppressed by the system or specific individuals. And so we, just tried to come up with a word. And so we had researchers come up with that word autism just to define our experiences that we face. And I think it started to gain ground maybe in the 90s and 2000, and a lot of individuals in the deaf community now understand what it means, and that's the word that we use to explain the experience of being oppressed, autism, and we have something to define it. Women use the word sexism. There's a word to define that experience. So just similar to a deaf person's experience, we use autism.
I honestly have never heard of that term. So thank you so much for explaining that. I really was in my head when you were talking about it. I was like, wait, did she say autism or autism? So thank you so much for explaining that. That's a new concept for me.
Yeah. And I don't know if you've also heard of the word vidism, VIDISM. That is a deaf-blind person's experience of being oppressed. So vidism is, where our, signs maybe, or for individuals that are individuals that have vision impairment, they now have a term, vidism, and we're learning more about that. So yeah, just to throw that new word out there too.
I appreciate that. Thank you so much. Oh man, I'm learning so much today. Thank you. Okay, let me look at our next question. I want to jump in because we have some good questions here still. Okay. Oh yeah. You presented an event like the American Alliance of Museum Conference. Am I saying that right? I feel like I didn't say that right. How do these platforms help with advancing the deaf culture? What does that look like for your culture, and did it bring awareness more to people? How many people attended? All the questions.
Oh yeah. I think basically It helps the audience to see a deaf person in action, while I'm presenting. It just helps to provide more awareness that there are deaf individuals involved in the museum field, and gives more exposure to, how I was using sign language and using an interpreter during the conference and presentation. And it just helped them to learn a little bit more about deaf culture. And hopefully the next time they meet a deaf person, it will be a positive experience and interaction.
Yeah, that's great. That's really great, because I think there's a lot of fear about the unknown with the deaf culture as well as the blind culture. And so sharing experiences is the way to go about helping to reduce people's anxiety about working with somebody who has a disability of that nature. So that's great. That's great. Okay. Um Oh, how has your work with the diverse deaf community informed the programs and exhibitors of the museum? Is that a tough question?
Yes. Yes, it really is.
Sorry.
It's a tough question. There is no one deaf person that is like all the other deaf people in the world. I mean, it is such a diverse community. Every deaf person is different. And, it could be based on their experience, whether they were born to deaf parents or hearing parents, whether they went to a deaf school or they were mainstreamed in a public school. Or what's happening more and more is a lot of them are isolated in the school system. They're the only deaf student. So, their own view of what it means to have a deaf identity, and, that is so varied and diverse. And from the Deafhood Institute, I started to understand that the systems have created a very fractured community. We struggle to understand each other. There, was one example. When I got involved with the Deaf Museum, there was an exhibit that I decided to put away because it explained that a deaf person, whether they identified by a capital D deaf or lowercase d deaf. And I decided that was more harmful than helpful, because it just created identity issues. And people would say, well, you're capital D deaf because you're born to deaf parents, or you went to a school for the deaf, or you use sign. You're more lowercase d deaf because you have hearing parents. You didn't go to a deaf school. It was very divisive and would make a person feel less than and less important in the deaf community. Or maybe they felt like they had nothing to contribute if they were lowercase d deaf. And I just saw so much harm possible. And, I respect people's rights to self-identify and honor that. Sometimes you have a person that may identify as being hard of hearing or deaf. And what does that mean? Hard of hearing would mean, oh, well, she can hear more than us. She's more with the dominant society of people that can hear. So does that mean that, they look down at those that are deaf and cannot hear? So just a lot of that divisiveness. And with the Deafhood Institute, we tried to shift it to looking at the values, how, we as individuals live our lives being deaf. And, we value our hands for sign language communication and our eyes to be able to use sign language. And, if another person really does identify and likes using their hearing and listening to music, that's fine. Or maybe they're a mix of both. They have some hearing, but they're also deaf. So just looking at their values and respecting those values instead of valuing the labels, which, then put us into boxes. And so, again, that's an answer about, the diverse deaf community and how it can sometimes be a challenge. And, the deaf-blind community, there's artwork that I'm wanting to be accessible to everyone, but how do we do that? I went to another art gallery in Seattle, and there's a large deaf-blind community in Seattle, and there was some artwork in the gallery. There was a sign that said, "Feel me," and that was my aha moment. Like, that's what we need to incorporate in our museum, where it's more touch-based and you can feel the artwork. So just making our museum accessible to everyone is a challenge, but we keep striving to do the best we can.
Yes. No, even working with Jackie Niekamp here at the Nelson, that is a hard thing to even try to discuss making accessible for everyone. There's no one way, because everybody has a different, everybody's on a spectrum with their disability. It's not just, oh, this person is blind, and then, oh, here's another blind person and they have the same vision as, me. And it doesn't work that way. So that is a hard thing to to figure out even. So even asking the right questions, that's tough. Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. Okay. I have heard of people using capital D and lower D, and it confused me as somebody who doesn't understand much about the deaf community. It really confused me when I was trying to understand more, and I almost was hesitant to ask the questions, because I don't want to offend anybody, but I wanted a better understanding of what was going on. And so understanding more in this conversation has been really helpful, because you don't ever want to offend anybody when asking questions, obviously. But it just didn't make sense. And it was talked about so fast that I almost missed it. And so I was like, wait a minute, what just happened? So thank you for explaining that. It's a difficult position to be in when you're dealing with different levels of deafness, I want to say. Is that the proper terminology for the overall umbrella?
Well, actually, the word we would like to use is deafhood. That is the opposite of deafness. Deafness is more of a medical condition. Deafhood supports the culture and the journey of deaf people and finding their identity. So it's a healthier term.
Yeah, I can understand that. Okay, I will adjust my terminology. Thank you so much. Okay, let me look at our next question here. Okay, so we've kind of talked about sharing a story from your advocacy and counseling work. Is there any other story you would like to speak about? Because that question then leads into the term lead K that I wanted to get your input on and learn a little bit more about.
Yeah, so lead K is short for language, equality, and acquisition for deaf kids. And that was the brainchild of a woman that used to work in Sacramento who ran a deaf agency there by the name of Sherry Farwina. And so Sherry has, I think, she's worked over 10 or 12 years. And the idea was to shift the conversation from, how do you raise and educate a deaf child? The choices being using sign or don't sign, or what we call the oral approach, or a combination of both, or signing in exact English order. So that's just been an ongoing struggle for, deaf people feel trapped. And as a result of all of that, a lot of deaf people graduate language deprived. And that obviously can have lifelong impacts in a harmful way. And so just shifting the conversation to focus more on a baby that is born, whether they're deaf or hearing, All babies have the ability to acquire language. And of course, various degrees based on who, the baby is, and focusing on making sure the baby is exposed to language, whatever that language may be, providing constant exposure to language. It should not matter whether it's going to be using sign language or not sign language. I mean, whatever works best for that child, use that approach so that they can acquire language. For deaf children, typically the best approach is using ASL, sign language, but that is a struggle for hearing parents to understand that. So, the genius that Sherry was to do an assessment on children the moment they're born. We know that babies start to acquire language right away. They, are already starting at 1, 2, 3 months, 6 months. There are milestones where they are acquiring language. There are benchmarks or milestones as to what a child will hit in their acquisition of language. That has already been established, and that applies to deaf children as well. So doing assessments at certain milestones will inform the parents how their child is doing in acquiring language. And they can then adjust their approach earlier and sooner, and how they can make sure that their child is getting exposure to a language. It's no longer a debate whether should they use sign language or not. Whatever language, the family is using, provide services to make sure they're acquiring that language. When a mother gives birth to a baby, they then go to the doctor. The doctor will do wellness checks, height and weight, and they'll measure the circumference of the head. If it's out of the normal benchmarks, then what does the doctor do? Refers them for services. Similar with language. We want to add in language to make sure that children are meeting the normal milestones within acquiring language. They're hitting those milestones and how they respond at 3 months, being able to make eye contact. Are they doing that? If they're not, why are they not? And then what are we going to provide to them so that they are? And I think it's just a game changer for children in the school systems. And hopefully that will help parents quickly make choices for their families. So that is Lead K. I don't have the exact numbers. I think it's been passed in 24 states, and in Kansas was passed in 2016, recently passed in Missouri in, I believe, 2021. We'll have to ask Clark for the exact year. But it has been passed in both Kansas and Missouri, and we obviously want a national bill, and hopefully in the future we can get it passed with the national legislature and focus on acquiring language. It's no more about whether a child should use sign language or not, because through all of that, they're losing valuable time for the child to even acquire language. So that is what Lead K is all about.
Okay, so I did not understand what Lead K was fully, so I appreciate you walking us through that. And I know that Clark has been a part of that, so we'll have to ask Clark, one of our deaf advocates, if he could share a little bit more about that too, because I'd love to hear both sides of what you've done, and I want to understand a little bit more about what Clark has done as well, because that is an important thing that needs to be happening, I think, more. And whatever we can do to help to move that forward, I think that would be really great. And if we can share this with the community and see what the community can do to help us move this forward, I think that would be amazing. So thank you for sharing that. Okay, so you said quite a bit in that last answer, and I'm trying to think. Oh, I wanted to talk to you. This is not on our list of questions, by the way. We were talking about what was right for children and what wasn't right, and how there's debates in both the deafhood community and the blind community. Did I say that right? I'm learning. Okay. Tell me if I'm not doing it right, because I need to know. Um, the cochlear implants. I know that that's kind of a debate in many different ways. From what I understand, there are some individuals who, like parents who are both deaf, do not necessarily always want their children to have a cochlear implant. And then you have other parents, maybe one is deaf and one is not deaf, and they do want their child, it's a split decision there. And I'm sure there's more variations than what I'm coming up with, but that's a pretty big debate. Am I understanding that correct?
Yeah. Yeah, it's complicated, but it is a debate. Like I stated earlier, you have the medical field, you have doctors trying to decide what should be done for deaf children. Because, the parents have a deaf child, they don't know what to do if they're hearing, they go to doctors or medical professionals for advice, but they don't work with the deaf community. So they don't know. The deaf community is such a vibrant community that has been around for thousands of years. They've been very active and engaged in different situations. And some situations, the community is thriving. And I mean, as far as whether cochlear implants are necessary, I feel like society has made it feel like it's necessary because we are a very audio-centric society, relies on spoken communication and audio. And if the systems and society hadn't made it that way, then we would have universal design for everything, and cochlear implants may not be needed. So it's just such a complicated topic. And, earlier I shared that story about the deaf boy and his mother. That deaf boy was realizing he's born different, and, is the mother not going to love me if I don't have that surgery and I'm not, implanted? And it's a very invasive surgery. They're implanting something in the head. It's safer now than it used to be, but, those parents are willing to go through that procedure because they're looking for their children to be the same as them. So just has such a psychological and emotional impact. I did not have a cochlear implant. It came about as I was older, but definitely struggled with my parents wanting me or forcing me to use a hearing aid. And it's not a quick fix if you get a cochlear implant. It's not like you become a hearing person right away. You're still going to struggle. And, I don't even use hearing aids anymore. I only wear them for my parents because they don't sign. So I put them on so that I can communicate with them. But our conversations, I would say, are maybe 50, 60% two-way, where I am having to really work hard to understand what they're saying, and they're working to make sure I understand them. But it's just not as fluent, that communication. If they could sign, it would be 100% more smooth and fluent between us. So the same with cochlear implants. It's not 100% ideal. And some individuals have just a fine journey with it. I mean, it's varied, and a deaf person born with certain degrees of being deaf, or they fall on the audiogram, they have to have that testing done to see if they even qualify for it. And it's different for everyone. If we all just used sign language, it wouldn't even be an issue. But Native Americans use sign language long before white settlers arrived in North America. Native Americans used signs to communicate with different tribes because their tribes would have their own spoken language and wouldn't be able to understand each other. So they solved that by using signs when they met to trade and interact. And they were able to communicate effectively. It's just so amazing. They had been using signs for thousands of years. So why couldn't we just continue something similar and everyone would be able to communicate wonderfully? So that's, a debate to me has caused more damage to the deaf child or individual than really necessary. But it is ongoing, and so many kids now have cochlear implants, and it's part of our lives. And the next genetic editing that's coming, the deaf community, we just feel like, how do we deal with all of that if they will only accept us? If they could only accept us and our diversity, it could be beautiful and learn from each other. And, we do have benefits and contribute. I learned in Mexico, they hired a deaf police officer because they are able to catch things on the security screens. They can catch things that hearing officers would not normally catch. And they found something unique about a deaf person and how they could contribute. So if we all could focus on that type of thinking and find, how we contribute uniquely in different ways, it would just be such a beautiful, diverse earth.
I agree that we should be more accepting of understanding sign because it would solve quite a bit of communication difficulties. And even in the blind community, there's debates about whether we should use Braille or teach children Braille, and it causes more difficulty, I think, than it should. Not to the same extent, because with your situation with the cochlear implants, that's a medical procedure that has the lasting effects. But there's a lot to be learned, I believe, from the deaf community, and it would be nice if we could all be able to speak. There was a video I watched, and this couple moved into this small community, and the husband was deaf, if I understand it correctly, and the whole community learned sign language to make him feel more comfortable for joining in. And I thought that was so beautiful. And I just wonder why we can't do that as a whole. It would be so much easier. So I understand that. Oh, goodness. You've given me a lot to think about, and I appreciate you walking me through some of the more difficult things to think about. It's hard to understand if there's no communication among those of us who deal with disabilities. So I really appreciate the different viewpoint that you've provided to me today. Thank you. If it's okay with you, I think that's all the questions I really have. Is there anything else that you would like to share, or anything you'd like for somebody who's new to dealing with hard of hearing or being a deaf individual that you would like for them to know moving forward?
Well, I'd like to invite you and everybody watching this to our next 5K that the museum hosts. We partner with Kansas School for the Deaf, along with the Deaf Museum. This will be our third 5K. It's an opportunity to just promote the idea that we can become a shared signing community, just working to encourage the hearing public to learn sign language and live and work and play together in the town of Olathe. So that's where the 5K is. And, so we're involving the Kansas City community as well.
Okay. Yeah, we can share that information on our websites and on different platform email chains, all of the things. So yeah, we would love to be able to help with that. That'd be great. Also, what is the best way for people to reach out to you so that we could put that on our screens so that people know this is the person you need to reach out to?
The best way to reach out is to look at our website. The website is www.deafmuseum.org. You can find contact information there, our phone number, our email address.
So I wanted to thank you so much for taking your time today and helping myself and our community understand more about your experience and more about the museum. So thank you so much. I really appreciate you taking your time today. Thank you.
Thank you for having me. It was nice chatting with you.
Absolutely. And you are welcome to come back anytime if you need to share information, send it my way, or if you want to update our community, we can have another podcast and go from there. So sounds good. Thank you so much. And thank you, everybody, for watching. We are so excited to share good news and experiences. Thank you. All right, everyone. Thanks for joining us today on our podcast. Today, I'm going to go through some of the monthly events that the Whole Person hosts. Again, my name is Haley Korf. I am your vision impaired host today, so bear with me. I've got a lot of notes here, okay? All right, the first event is Getting Social. It's the first Friday of every month. The next event is Time to Spare, and that is the third Wednesday of every month. That is our accessible bowling open to everyone who has a disability. The next event is Mind's Eye View, and that is the first Monday of every month. That is more geared towards people who are vision impaired or blind to get together and talk about some of the difficulties. Then after that, we have our DIY skills for young adults, age range 18 through 24, and that is the last Wednesday of every month. Brain Injury Peer Support Group, the second Thursday of every month. And then Tech Talk, the second Monday of the month. And that is also geared towards people who are vision impaired or blind to get together and talk a little bit more about accessibility issues. If you have any more questions, feel free to look it up at thewholeperson.org. And again, please join us for any event at any time. Thank you.